Well, as folks join us, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Bienvenidos, bienvenides. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Sofia Chaparro. I'm an assistant professor of culturally and linguistically diverse education at the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Colorado, Denver. I'm so happy you are here. My colleagues in the CLDE program and I created this event. Because as teacher educators and educational researchers concerned with our bilingual and multilingual students, we know that our local education community and many of our own students who are full-time teachers and practicing teachers and teacher candidates are faced with the great challenge and opportunity of integrating new to the country students in unprecedented numbers in a very short amount of time. And so while our state and local schools have always been a place where immigrant students attend, the number of immigrants and refugees over the past 2 years have hit record highs. So just to give you a sense, in 2022, there were nearly 46.2 million immigrants living in the United States, and that has been the most in US history. As of the beginning of this year, 2024, there were more than 2.5 million immigrants and refugees that crossed the US-Mexico border seeking asylum. Now, while not all of those who crossed were able to stay, there are over 1 million people who are waiting for their cases to be processed. And if you are here today at this webinar, it is likely that your school has received some of these children as newcomers, or that you teach students and teachers who have newcomers in their classroom. And there are so many wonderful people here to share their knowledge and expertise, and we wanted to take an opportunity to do that. This event is connected to other efforts that we're doing to serve our community through public education and providing free resources. Some of this has been funded by the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at CU Denver. And part of this work, which we're really excited to share with you today, is the development of an online professional development resource for welcoming newcomers in the classroom. So at the end of the webinar, I'm going to give you a sneak peek of what this looks like. This resource will be free and available to the public online, and we will officially launch it on October 30th. And in fact, each of our panelists today has been a collaborator in developing these newcomer modules, and what you will hear today will be included in some way in this resource. And so how our panel will work is I will introduce each of our panelists and get to chat with each of them, and then we will open up the conversation with questions from the audience. My colleague, Chris Carson, will be moderating the chat and taking note of your questions as we go through. There is a closed caption available to you. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's also the Q&A where you can start to write your questions. And this webinar will be recorded. So if you have colleagues or friends that didn't get a chance to be here, once the recording is available, we'll email everybody that registered, and you can feel free to share this resource. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, my colleague, and as I like to call her, La Jefa, Dr. Esther de Jong. Esther is professor and program leader in the Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Education program at CU Denver. Before that, she was the director of the School of Teaching and Learning and professor in ESOL bilingual education at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Dr. de Jong was president of TESOL International Association from 2017 to 2018. And among her many achievements, she most recently obtained a $3.2 million National Professional Development Grant from the U.S. Department of Education, along with our colleague, Lucinda Soltero Gonzalez, for the project Next Gen Colorado Bilingüe, which aims to significantly enhance bilingual education in Colorado. So, Esther, can you tell us a little bit of what prompted you and the CLDE team to do this work and apply for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion grant that is funding it?
Thanks, Sophia, and welcome everybody for this webinar. One of the things that I've only been at CU Denver, this is my third year, so I'm still learning. But one of the things that has been really clear to me is how CU Denver, and particularly the School of Education and Human Development, is connected to the communities that it serves and has a very strong equity focus. And so, having looked at our program, which of course is a super program, we do amazing work in this area. We've moved our program online so that we can reach more teachers. But the one thing that I realized was coming up last year over and over again in the media and in the news was this question of newcomers. We have new arrivals. They are still very much learning English. They know so much in their home language, but what do we do? And this we heard from the Colorado Department of Education. We heard this from district leaders. We heard this from teachers. And I think what I realized was with the team, this is a now issue. This is not a let's go and get a master's in 2 years issue. This is something we want now. And I think the opportunity to apply for this particular grant really allowed us to kind of say, how can we develop a resource with and for teachers that really responds to the fact that we don't want just general principles, we want to see what it looks like in practice. And so we wrote the grant, and we're very appreciative of the office for giving and awarding us the grant and the work that we're able to do to hopefully come up with a resource that will serve the entire state and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. Gracias. So I am actually really excited to introduce our second panelist, Adria Padilla Chavez. Adria brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this work, as she has been both a classroom teacher and instructional coach for the last 19 years in the Denver metro area. She received her BS from the University of New Mexico in bilingual education and an MA in CLDE from CU Boulder through the Bueno Center. Adria is not only an amazing instructor at CU Denver in our CLDE program, but also a PhD candidate at CU Boulder. And Adria's research seeks to understand how to design learning experiences and ecologies that affirm and recognize one's dignity. And so I'm really excited you're here, Adria. You have extensive experience, as I mentioned, as a teacher and instructional coach. And in this last year, you've been focusing on newcomers at the secondary level. Can you tell us a bit about this experience and how you've created a space for community building and care with your students?
Gracias, Sofia. I'd like to share my screen and talk a little bit about the Newcomer Center. And I want to begin by saying that we have an incredible team, a caring team, a dedicated team, and that's what the students come to at the Newcomer Center that is housed within Thornton High School. So it was opened in August of 2023. It's a comprehensive program. So the students that enroll at the Newcomer Center attend all of their content areas within the high school and then go to the larger high school context, Thornton High, for their electives. So we're only in our second year, and we are all learning together along with the students. And but I just have to really give a shout out to the Newcomer Center staff, and because they have taught me so much. We began last August with 40 students, and we ended our year with 150. And this year we began our year with 100, and now we're reaching 160. The Newcomer Center there are with us for 2 semesters, so 1 year. So those that enrolled in the spring started again in the fall with us. So we are growing rapidly, and so we've added one content teacher to each content area this year. One of the main guiding, not principles, but one of the main plans for the Newcomer Center was to have an advisory class. And at first, the class was designed in a way for us to support students in accessing the high school system, Infinite Campus, grades, how to access and get involved in sports, kind of understand like the culture of high school in the United States, homecoming, all these things that that would be new, and helping them understand them and helping them to participate and access them. And that was what the advisory class initially was designed for. And then we realized it needed to be more, and they needed more. And what we also designed too was every week we would kind of do a check-in and ask them, how are you doing socially, emotionally? And more than that, how are we doing? How are we doing in supporting you? And that was a really beautiful experience for all of us, because then we could really understand, and this was a low stakes, a lot of it was through Google Forms, so, and could be, so they could communicate through their own language and kind of in a private way of how to give us feedback on how we were doing. And a lot of what they expressed, of course, there's an urgency to learn English, to be able to participate in society and the larger context here. But also what they were communicating was time to build community. And so advisory started to take a new shape, where it became kind of an opportunity for choice and cultivating of community and friendship. So we started offering opportunities for picking board games, doing crafts together. We had what we do in the CLD department, a language portrait, an identity portrait. And what we notice is with time is that students who were at their lunch hour or had an off period would come, and still do come, into our advisory classes, because it's a place of welcoming, a place where they feel that they belonged, and a place for community and human and connection. And so that has been something really successful. But as I explained, the numbers of growing, we're feeling constrained also with space and opportunity to cultivate relationships as we grow. So that's something that we are keep revisiting, like, and keep calibrating on how to have our classes in ways where we can have numbers where we can really maintain those relationships. Also, what our teachers intentionally focus on is they design for collaboration. And it's beautiful if you see this picture, and a brilliant teacher teaches our ELA course and really leverages like this cross-linguistic comparison and discussion of our languages, and designing for collaboration. All of our classrooms are in group settings. You'll see visuals of all of their language represented, and PowerPoints on the wall. Their flags are represented throughout Newcomer. So those have been things that have been that have become, that are values and practices within Newcomer Center. And then, and then here's advisory. And advisory, like there's a sign up if do you need help, and help is always available. Not only help, but assistance. And you see the calibration, it play, like we all need play to build community, and play to make connections. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Adria. That's beautiful. And your newcomer students, what countries are they coming from?
Let's see. Venezuela, Colombia, we have Nicaragua, Honduras, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Mexico, Afghanistan, Russia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Guatemala, and did I say Costa Rica? Costa Rica, Peru.
Awesome. A lot of diversity there. Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing a snippet of what you do in advisory. Now, from what I understand, students are in the Newcomer Center for a year, and then they transition into their high school classes with English fluent peers. What do you think is still needed for students to make that transition successfully out of the Newcomer Center and into a sheltered high school class with peers that are already fluent in English?
Yes, and I think that is something that we are still learning. We cannot learn unless we hear the voices and experiences of the students that are right now in their first year of integration. And so, and that's what's interesting is those that have integrated continue to come back, walk through our halls to be connected to us because they still feel that this is their community. So, and still desiring that community human connection. And so we've been trying to open up the dialogue with them. And so part of that is one, we are going to start a leadership class next semester. In that leadership class will be students who were with us last year in the Newcomer Center that are now part of the larger high school context. And so they'll be in the class to help us, help us understand through mentorship. Our goal is for them to become ambassadors and mentors to incoming newcomers, and also to inform us what they're needing and what they're experiencing. This could possibly become some sort of youth participatory action research projects where they explore their own linguistic and cultural identities and histories and what that means in the context of learning within the high school context, and then informing us what their needs are. What I have been thinking about lately is what integration means. And after the Brown case, Dr. King said that integration, we need to see integration in political terms where there is shared power. And so what that makes me think of is equality of linguistic variations and cultural practices. And so I think just like when we've had so many changes in humanity and society, we have opportunities to redesign and reimagine and dream of what learning could be in linguistically diverse and pluralistic communities. And I think that Thornton has a beautiful opportunity, a unique opportunity to lead that work. I'm really hopeful. We're only in the second year, so I'm really hopeful that that could become a possibility of how we can leverage linguistic repertoires, leverage cultural practices, and become communities of pluralism, and really, and that being the center of the learning and the meaning making. That's me dreaming, but I often think about what students tell me, and what they tell me is that they do learn and make meaning through their home language, and also want to develop English as their second language, develop English. They feel that urgency, but also want to validate them as with their cultural, linguistic, and historical wealth, and how much we can learn from them and how that can be part of the meaning making.
Thank you so much, Adria. I'm always so inspired to listen to you talk. And yes, we should dream of different spaces and the possibilities, right? And thinking of newcomer students as giving us an opportunity to do that.
Exactly.
Even despite the challenges, right?
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I am excited now to introduce one of our very own alumni from the CLDE program. She's also been collaborating with us on developing the newcomer modules, the newcomer professional development resources that I'll share with you at the end of this webinar. And this is Andrea Restrepo. Andrea has been a teacher for the past 10 years, working in both Colorado and North Carolina. She has been serving multilingual students as a teacher, and she is now an instructional support facilitator at Elise Middle School in Robbins, North Carolina. She recently graduated with her master's in CLDE from our program. And so, Andrea, thanks for being here. I know it's a little later for you in North Carolina. You have been a teacher for 10 years, and most recently you taught 5th grade here in Denver at a DPS, at a Denver public school. And you were in one of the schools that received the most newcomers last year. Can you tell us a bit about what that was like for you as a teacher?
Yeah, of course. So I just wanted to share my screen with you all and share maybe some of the headlines that you have seen in the past year or so. I'm sure that everyone who is participating here has seen more or less a similar headline of statewide issue, dramatically adjusting, double enrollment. So that double enrollment headline there is actually the school that I was teaching at in Colorado before I moved back to North Carolina. And so talking a little bit about what it was like as a teacher, I actually was not intending to be a classroom teacher at the beginning of the 23-24 school year. So my position was actually Spanish support for our transitional native language program. And I was going to be supporting third, fourth, and fifth grade with a focus in fourth and fifth grade because they didn't have ELA-S classrooms in fourth and fifth, just in K through 3. So that's how the year started. We started doing all of the WIDA screeners because we just had small trickles of students, newcomer students. And because we were a transitional language school, we were getting a lot of attention. A lot of other schools were kind of referring their enrollment and their registering families to us. And we just started getting more and more and more students. So to give you kind of a visual of what this looked like in Denver Public Schools, you can see from July to August, it kind of stayed under that 500 mark. And then end of August, September, October, November, we saw a drastic increase. And that increase was very present at Ashley Elementary. So I had two choices. I could either go into the ribbed pool and wait for another school to pick me up, or I could go into the fifth grade classroom and be the ELA-S teacher. So I went into the fifth grade classroom to be the ELA-S teacher, and I had a class of 35 students, 28 of them being newcomers. So obviously this was a giant challenge, not just for my classroom, but for the school as a whole. Ashley Elementary is so diverse and such a warm and community-oriented school, but I don't think anyone imagined that we would go through what we went through, and we were not prepared logistically, emotionally, resource-wise. But I can happily say that every teacher took it in stride and we did the absolute best that we could. And, I want to share a little bit more about how we did what we did. And as I mentioned before, here we have Denver Public Schools, kind of an overview of the area in Denver, and the huge red dots being registration 50 or more students. And as you can see in that blue square, that is Ashley Elementary where I taught, and we were not a newcomer center. So again, a lot of the resources, curriculum, structure that newcomer centers have and have mastered and done an incredible job of, we were not in that space because that is not a need that we had previously met. And so that left us in a difficult position of, we are welcoming these families with open arms. We are excited for them to be there, but we were not prepared for the number of newcomers that were coming. It wasn't just transitional language. It was, oh, we're not working on Spanish and English. They're coming with the Spanish, some that have never attended school before, and now we're also trying to teach them English. So that was definitely probably one of the most difficult and special learning experiences of my career. But it definitely put me in a place where I feel like I can confidently speak to how to best serve our newcomer community.
Thank you, Andrea. And to follow up with that, it was challenging, right, to have to shift constantly, right? And you were teaching while completing your master's in CLDE. And because you were going through this, you decided to focus your master's research project on your newcomer students, but specifically on their sense of belonging. Can you tell us about why you prioritized that? And what you learned from your project?
Sure. So the demographics of our classrooms have drastically changed over the past 20 years, as I'm sure most everyone has noticed. But I ask myself, are we as educators prepared, right? Most teachers have gone through extensive teacher prep programs, but I don't think that we were prepared for this. And so in thinking about not only teacher prep and pedagogy, how are we best meeting the needs socially and emotionally of our students? And the students who are coming to our classrooms right now are going through very unique situations. A lot of them are coming with trauma and experiences that we're not equipped to talk about. We aren't just teaching students a new language. We are teaching them how to function in a school setting, how to adapt, how to meet new people, how to experience a completely different culture while maintaining their own. And so I wanted to do my research, kind of rooted in the hope that I could give and share the knowledge with my coworkers of how to create a sense of belonging in my classroom. Because as a multilingual learner myself, I don't feel that that was properly cultivated for me when I was a student. So I asked myself, what teacher actions impact student sense of belonging? What student to student peer actions impact the student sense of belonging? And what factors need to be considered when planning to welcome a newcomer student? So I looked at 5 students specifically and analyzed them and observed and spoke with them over the course of the semester. And through my data, I gathered that the actions and behaviors are both equally as important from teachers and from their peers. And so looking at the trends, I realized that attention, closeness, and comfort and community were what students valued the most. So things as simple as I would like a peer to look at me when I'm speaking. That would make me feel like what I have to say is important, regardless of whether I'm speaking in English or in Spanish, in my case with my ELAS students. And then also from the teacher, choosing a student to share their ideas, to share their thoughts, to read something out loud, to solve a problem. It is so present for students when they are or are not being called on. It might seem like something like, oh, duh, that's best practice, but it is one of the things that students internalize the most. Closeness and comfort was also very, very important. Obviously, my class was full of Latino students, and it was important for me to express to my coworkers as Latina myself that my students like closeness and like comfort, and not every culture is the same. And so for me, that was specific to, I really like when you give me a hug or a high five, or, when you come and say good morning and have a lot of FaceTime with me. And other cultures, that might not be the case. And so the importance of really studying a culture to study exactly what creates that closeness and comfort. It might not be a physical touch like a hug or a high five, but what creates that closeness for your students that are newcomers. And then the last is community. We were an ELAS classroom, and that was a very safe place for students to make mistakes and to learn, because most everyone in our class was going through what they were going through. And so they had a sense of understanding of each other's home life, country, culture. Most of my students were from Colombia and Venezuela. And I myself, as Colombian, I felt like we were able to bond in a way that made them feel like they could talk about their culture and their food and their interests and the music. And so many times when I would ask them during their surveys or questionnaires, what makes you feel like a sense of belonging? And it was as simple as, I shared my favorite food. I was able to talk to you about La Novena at Christmas time. Just things that helped me understand that they want to talk about their culture. They want to feel that community. And even with students who have been here for years, taking that time in class for them to cultivate that community, even though they might not come from the same country, but finding those commonalities between them definitely impacted their sense of belonging.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And I love all the connections I'm seeing from your work to what Adria just shared about the importance of cultivating community and a sense of belonging. and whether that's through, a class full of students that share common language and common culture, or a class of students that don't, but find ways to make those connections either in small groups and then in the larger group. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you.
Now I am honored to introduce our next panelist. She's my colega and comadre, and someone I have the pleasure and opportunity to work alongside with and learn from, Dr. Adriana Alvarez. Adriana has a PhD in educational equity and cultural diversity from the University of Colorado Boulder, and a master's degree in education and bilingual education from the University of Texas at El Paso, where Adriana taught as a bilingual teacher for 11 years before starting her PhD program. She is currently assistant professor in the CLDE program here at the School of Education and Human Development at CU Denver, and her research interests center on biliteracy development and pedagogy and family school partnerships with a focus on equity-oriented and strength-based approaches in Latinx communities. So, Adriana, thanks for being here. Adriana, over the past 4 years, you have been the principal investigator of a study called the Belonging and Trust Study, where you have collaborated with a community of recently arrived students and families in the state of Colorado, as well as a group of teachers that serve them. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that work.
Claro que sí, muchas gracias. Thank you for that warm introduction, and bienvenidos todos a nuestro webinar. Welcome everyone, and today I'd like to share a project with 5th grade teachers and students that evolved from a larger study that precisely focused on better understanding the factors that contribute and shape families and students' experiences of trust and belonging in schools, as well as those experiences of distrust and lack of belonging, with the intention to repair and build those trusting relationships. And so, as you can see, this is a quick overview of where we started, and we use findings from that initial project to partner with an elementary school and address the needs that educators and school leaders identified in their context. And one of the ways that they wanted to bring in or the work to address sense of belonging was precisely to what just Andrea and Adria were sharing, building community and getting to know each other. And so our colega here, Adria Padilla Chavez, was a researcher in this study as well. And so what I really want to focus on today are the pedagogical approaches that were co-designed with this amazing group of 5th grade teachers and how they implemented them with their 5th graders, many who were new to the country and to the English language. And so the ideas that we implemented were very purposefully multimodal, meaning that we sought ways beyond oral and written language to integrate children's expressions of their identities, experiences, and families into their classroom in meaningful ways. First, as a resource to support their well-being, sense of connection and belonging in the classroom and in school, and then as resources towards language development. These collaboration, as you'll see, and I'll speak briefly to each one, resulted in a bookmaking project here in the third line, where we invited students to write and illustrate a children's book inspired by the projects that they created in 5th grade that also conveyed a message to other children in their community and at their school. And we found that students engage with these multimodal opportunities in very agentive ways and integrating their creativity, connecting back to what Adria was saying of that reimagining and envisioning a different future and a different setting. And so this form of sharing created a very safe environment in which stories that students shared weren't necessarily about them, but supported them in processing their new social cultural context. And so lastly, I'll briefly share an invitation of a project that led to an arts-based project called What Remains, where one of the books that was created is now part of the exhibit at Museo de las Américas, opening this October, and I'll share about this. But I wanted to share how in this co-design with teachers and going back to how do we create and build this sense of community, this sense of belonging with our students. And so we offered choices for students as they prepared a final 5th grade project that they would share with community panels. And students were invited to select from a variety of ideas that were beyond, like I said, written or narrative language. And so these ideas included creating maps of significant places to them and their families, a visual timeline that depicted significant events in their lives. We integrated family interviews that students conducted with their families and invited students as well to bring artifacts, objects, songs, poems, dichos, novelas, as Andrea was saying, that represent themselves or any part of their story. And so this group of talented teachers took these ideas and creatively sought additional resources and tools to support their students as they engaged with these choices that were embedded within what teachers were already doing. And so, for example, in ways, there was a question on the panel from my prima Bertalina about like, how do we bring in those, we have mandated curriculum. So opening up small opportunities for that sense of connection and that sense of sharing and just simply getting to know each other in humanizing ways was very powerful. And so one of the teachers brought in, when we were discussing maps, for example, decided to use Google Earth for students to create a map project. So imagine the moment when I'm sitting in a classroom and all of a sudden I hear a from one of the little girls sitting in front of her screen, and she is looking around like, maestra, maestra. And in that moment, we all gathered around her computer and she started zooming in, and she goes, that's my school in Honduras, in a very small town. I know that playground, I know that street, and around the corner is my grandma's house. In that moment, time just stopped. Everyone gathered around the computer to share a piece of this little girl's life. And that just created this sense of connectedness and sharing pieces of our life that and in integral parts of our identities. And again, using Google Earth as a tool, something funny that happened was a student was looking for significant places, found their grandparents' house in Chihuahua, and in the Google image there was grandpa watering the lawn. And so these simple things, but that really brought a sense of connection, a sense of belonging to the students, where they could feel they could share these moments. And so they shared, and something that we noticed is simply how much they valued the simple questions about being asked about their life. Instead, we tend to think, well, now moving from here on forward to the future without really addressing these parts and how these expressions, as Andrea was saying, connected them to their peers, regardless of whether they shared the experience or not. It was simply came back to getting to know each other and getting to know our stories resulted in this sense of belonging. And we were always very cautious about ensuring that sharing was always their choice and attentive, that some experiences are challenging. However, we also found that students were eager to share, and when given the opportunity, they really wanted to share and be heard. I'll share just a few reflections from the students, but we really consistently saw that creating their maps or sharing these aspects of their lives really provided that opportunity to connect in the classroom and to display who they are in alternative ways, may be particularly of importance when they are not able yet to express in English. And so using objects and multimodal opportunities created that opportunity. And so from that study, we moved on to creating children's books. And so students then use their projects from 5th grade as a source of inspiration to write and illustrate a children's book that also conveyed a message for students at the former elementary. They were now had moved on to middle school. And so what we observed here is that the messages that students were sharing were incredibly powerful and talked about that sense of belonging and that moving beyond the fear. Like this quote, hay muchos niños que no les gusta contar su historia porque tienen miedo de que les pase algo o tal vez por ser discriminado y quiero que estén felices de contar su historia. So these accounts that demonstrated how children were processing and making sense also of the lived experience of starting a new school in a new country with a new language. Here's another quote that a student wrote. I want to share that they belong here and everyone has a right. And so we finally published the series of books, and students went back to their former elementary school to read their story, often selecting classrooms that they had known as 5th graders and as newcomers to read and share. And one of the observations, and Adria, you can add to this, but it was now how much these resources really opened up the opportunity for them to share how much development they had had in English in a year. And just to share a few examples here, for example, Anna wrote a magical book and she had brought in an embroidered backpack from Guatemala to represent her identity. And in her children's book, she turned the backpack into a magical teleporting backpack that brings her back to Guatemala to continue learning Cachiquel. And her dog Babas goes with her, and now the Babas only barks in Cachiquel and is showing off his excellent bachata moves here. And so this combination of agency in selecting like what message is important for me to tell other children in my school, combined with the envisioning of a future. And here is an example of one of our students wishing, and I'll read it, you can see the translation, but she wishes that all Latino children are always welcome in America and that they feel that they belong. And in another wish, her book was about 15 wishes for her quinceañera, or 15th birthday party. And the other wish was that I dream that everyone has a right to vote, even if you weren't born here. And so with these books, students were processing their new experiences in direct ways by sharing pieces of their life, as well as in a protected way or in a safe way by creating a children's book that wasn't precisely about them. So inviting students, and it doesn't have to be a children's book, it can be something creative or a way to create a story based on these experiences. And I'll just end by sharing that one of these books became a memoir, more for older audiences, in which a 13-year-old wrote about her journey from Honduras to Colorado, giving insights to the challenging experiences, as well as the experience of reuniting with her family and her sense of belonging in her new life. And this is a way to humanize and to understand the experiences that our students are bringing. And with this, I invite, so this book, this memoir, will be part of an exhibit at Museo de las Américas that highlights the project What Remains, which draws together artistic production and academic research to reframe the migrant experience as a global and timeless human experience, one that occurs before, during and after the passage itself. And it is a tribute to those who have taken this journey, but may have been silenced or whose voices were never heard or we don't give the space to hear. The powerful memoir will be part of this exhibit. Y con esto les doy las gracias.
Muchas gracias, Adriana. Thank you all so much. It's such an inspiring project with so many parts to it. I'd like to remind everybody that all of this work that Adria and Adriana and Andrea have been talking about will be part of the Newcomer professional development resource we're working on finalizing. And I hope that you all noticed too that in this webinar, we haven't talked about teaching and learning strategies yet, right? I haven't given you a list of top 10. I haven't talked about language scaffolding, not because that's not important, but because one thing that we all share is this prioritizing of care and cultivating community, and what we see as the most pressing need for these children and young people who have had experiences they need to process. And when they are presented with welcoming community, and when they are presented with authentic learning tasks where the goal is not to learn English, but the goal is to make meaning through language, right? Through developing both English and their native languages to communicate something important and meaningful to them. And that can be really powerful. And so I hope that, like me, you're inspired by everything you've seen. I'd love to invite everybody to ask your questions. We have a Q&A. You can also put them in the chat. And as you think of questions, I am going to take a moment to give you a sneak peek of what our Newcomer modules look like. And so I'm going to share my screen here. We're using a platform that allows for interactivity. And so as we've developed this resource, we wanted it to be flexible. And so it's flexible in the sense that it can be a self-paced course, or it can be something used within a professional learning community. Our goal really is to respond to the immediate needs of teachers and educators by providing practical ideas and lessons. And because of that, we feature teacher highlights, where you get to hear from current teachers like you heard today, on what they're doing and how they put many of the strategies that we'll mention in action. And in fact, we've developed this resource with teachers as collaborators. Both had a focus group before starting this work, and then have had teachers work with me to develop this work together to make sure that it is something that responds to the need. Like I mentioned, Andrea has been actively collaborating with developing all this content, and we have people in our CLDE program giving us feedback, and we have current CLDE MA students helping develop content and give feedback. One of the things we've built into the modules are what we call deeper dives, where each of our lessons, you can deepen your knowledge and understanding. And so they ask you to put a strategy into practice and reflect on how that impacted your classroom. Or we ask you to read a text or watch a video and reflect deeply on what that means for your practice. And so these deeper dives and reflection activities can be used as a way to earn credit from your district. And that's something that we're still negotiating, and particularly we're interested in working with CDE to think of ways to incorporate this resource as part of the required 45 hours of CLDE training. And so that's still in the works. And, you know, again, this resource will be free and available online, and we are going to be officially launching it on October 30th. And so anybody who registered for this webinar will get a link and will be able to access it and share it. And we're going to be including some feedback loops to see, how we can continuously revise and improve this work and how it's serving you in whatever role you play as an educator or teacher educator or school leader. And so I'm going to stop right here and see if we have any questions from our audience, from our
I think there are many questions in the chat. Do we want to start from the first question that we received?
Sure. And actually, Chris has been moderating, so I'll read the question that he posted. How can ELD teachers and school leaders support newcomer students when they only have 1 or 2 ELD classes and the rest are in regular content areas with teachers who do not know much about how to support MLs? It's a really good question. Would any of our panelists like to take that?
I think this is what makes the sharing of this information that much more important, to share not with just ELD teachers or ELS teachers, but with all content area teachers, is because none of the content is going to be accomplished unless you are able to meet the needs of your newcomer students, social emotional needs, or understanding their story, where they come from. We talked a lot about assessments even when we were creating this module, and what is important to put in there is, we give these baseline assessments just on language and say, okay, the student doesn't know English. And that's it. That's their indicator on their file. In Infinite Campus, you see, ESL, but you don't have any, unless you go digging for the home language survey, the home language questionnaire. Have they received any schooling before they arrived to you? Just because they're a newcomer does not mean they are below grade level, does not mean they are illiterate, does not mean they are not on a grade level in other content areas. So if language is the only barrier, that would be something that as a content area teacher, I would want to know. For example, in math, out of all of my newcomers, I have some students who had never been in school who were adding within 10. And then I had other students who are on a 7th grade math level in 5th grade because they had prior instruction. And so I think to answer your question about only having 1 or 2 ELD blocks in a day, that's why you really do have to gain the investment and have those content area teachers be stakeholders. And I think this answers another question that was in there about raising awareness with staff, is that none of the content is going to be attainable or accomplished unless you collaborate with your ELD teachers, with your social worker, with your Spanish language teachers, with any person who has eyes and ears on those students. It's a collaborative effort. And so the regular content, you're still supposed to be legally meeting the needs of your MLLs. And so I think that's also a thing, is let's think about the consent decree, right? Let's think about the legalities of it too. It's not just, oh, this is what's best for kids. It's no, this is what the students deserve. This is what they are legally deserving of. And educating. I think a lot of it is never bad intention. It's a lack of knowledge. And I think just helping educate your staff and your coworkers and saying like, hey, this is actually a bigger team effort. It's not just, hey, let me send my kids to ELD. Does that answer the question, do you think?
Thank you, Andrea. Would anybody like to add on?
Sure. I think that just a thread we heard is about the community, and each classroom is an opportunity to develop community. And developing community is that there's opportunities for collaboration and discussion and relationship building as part of the design of the community within every classroom. And I think that the second part is, if one does not have the background in CLDE, thinking about first and foremost, how are students participating meaningfully in the content learning, and how just taking a lens of how can I ensure that there's equitable participation. That of course is translation and support and opportunities to share knowledge through their own linguistic practices and their own linguistic practices. So that's just a beginning part that I think could help. So community and relationships and how are we designing for participation?
And I will just add that in thinking about the part of the question about school leaders, there is so much work to do about shifting how that perception of regular content area teachers say, well, it's not my job, it's the ELD teacher's job to know, and having that ownership and understanding that everything that happens in that content classroom is part of supporting our newcomer students. And so I think there is an important shift of transferring that responsibility and having that shared responsibility as a team at the school.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I see here one in the chat. How are the newcomers in high school being supported when they are integrated to a regular high school? How can we support newcomers in high school when they are integrated, I'm assuming, into regular high school classes with their English fluent peers?
I think that might be for me. And so I think this is exactly what the focus is this year, is understanding the honest truth is that we are building the bridges as they are integrating, and we need to be able to collaborate and understand more deeply how to build those bridges for the students. And it's an ongoing conversation and learning experience. And I thank you for the question. And I think one goal we have is to understand also what the experiences are like, and to make those experiences very visible so that we know how to create those bridges. And that's really important, is to understand the everyday experiences of newcomer students who have integrated into the high school context. And I believe that's a beginning start. Thank you.
Thank you, Adria. Esther, do you have any parting comments?
I just think this is an amazing effort, and the emphasis on community and collaboration. We all have a math curriculum to teach, we all have a language arts curriculum to teach, but the learning won't happen. So we kind of need those pieces first, and it's, I think, a really good reminder. The module also, Sophia didn't say this, also has the strategies in it, so no worries. We will also do the strategies in there. But we are at our last time. So this was amazing. I want to thank the panelists for doing an amazing job, and give it back to Sophia to final words.
Yes, thank you all again so much. And yes, the newcomer modules will have ideas for lessons and scaffolding language and strategies, but we really wanted to emphasize what needs to come first, or in combination with, right? And so we're really excited to share this work with you all. Again, the newcomer modules will launch on October 30th. So anybody who registered will get access to them. They will be free. They will be open to the public. We thank you all so much for joining us. I'd really like to thank Andrea and Adria and Adriana for sharing their knowledge and expertise. And we'll send you a link to the recording when it's done, so you all can share with colleagues. And all the educators out there that are joining us, thank you so much for the work you do. It matters. It matters a lot. So thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.